So getting back to our content for today, so we've been talking about fuzzing, Peach Fuzzer, AFL Fuzzer, and I thought it appropriate to introduce an assignment. So I have lab 2. This may potentially be a more time-consuming lab, not necessarily because it's harder, but just because some of the fuzzing things, they just need time. They need time in the CPU, so it's not something you can just do at the last minute, at least not successfully. And for the assignment, you're not going to be successful if you just try to do it at the last minute, because you do need time, you do need CPU, and so you should do it over a period of probably several days. Now, Peach Fuzzer is one that is not necessarily straightforward. That can be a little bit more complicated, especially as you get more deeper into it. The one that I've selected for you guys is, and did I forget to put the binary on there? I may have done that. Looks like I did. So I'll be uploading the binary later. But our target for that is going to be a server, and so we'll use Peach Fuzzer to fuzz the server and see if we can get a crash. Now, if you wanted to, you could open it up in IdaPro or WinDebug it, or an alternative tool if you know how to use them. Some of our online students may not know how to use those, but I think everybody here is familiar with those, correct? Okay. So you could do that. You could find the vulnerability that way, and probably most of you could be successful in making it crash. But what I want you to do is to try to achieve that with Peach Fuzz. So we're just trying to learn Peach Fuzz. And I thought this would make it a little bit easier, a little bit more simple. And so if you go inside there, inside the Peach Fuzz, I've provided you with various files that can assist you, some examples. If you go to the community edition site for Peach Fuzz, there used to be a lot of resources where you could go and read up on how to do certain things, and I'm not sure why, but a lot of it's just says gives error messages, unavailable. Now Peach has also moved to a commercial version, so I don't know if they're just trying to, I don't know, make that inaccessible to people, or it's hard to say. So getting some of the information on how to successfully use Peach Fuzz potentially could be challenging, but we do have all these XML examples, and these are ones that I kind of demoed previously. So we'll talk about those in more depth in a moment. And then the second project is going to deal with AFL. So you'll have a source code, and you can take the source code and you'll need to use AFL to compile it with instrumentation. So with AFL, you have two ways of doing it. You can go off the source code and you can add instrumentation, or you can do the black box approach and you can make use of something called QEMU. It's QEMU. And that's not included in the standard version of AFL Fuzz, so you need to get an alternate fork. And then that does require some additional dependencies to set up. And it does get to be a little bit more complicated to get it going successfully. So that's part of the reason why we're doing the instrumented version. But I want you to be fully aware of that as you can continue on past this course, and you may not have the luxury of having source code, and you may need to just do it on a binary where you don't have a source code. It's not instrumented. You absolutely have the capability of doing it. Ultimately, AFL Fuzz could be used on, at least on some fork of it, on pretty much anything you can conceive of. As I mentioned, kind of alluded to before with AFL Unicorn, or not AFL Unicorn, but a Unicorn engine. So you can utilize that on non-standard things, get it to a crash point, and get some tool to save the CPU state, save memory. And then you can use Unicorn for emulation and provide it with a starting location and provide it with all that information. And then you can run those non-standard things through emulation. Now that's kind of, we're not going to do that, but I'm just pointing out that the option is there, and that description is kind of somewhat vague in general, but AFL is a very powerful tool. You can also use AFL in a Windows environment. So AFL was developed by a Google employee, and another Google employee also did a fork of it, so you can use it on Windows. And so now for the assignment that I have for you guys, if you're somebody who's really deeply into Windows, you don't want to mess with Linux, and you feel that you have a good understanding of AFL, and you want to try and set it up on your own, I would allow you to do that as a substitution. But I am providing you with the binary, or the source code actually, and you'll generate the binary. So the jpeg.tar.gz. If you go into the iLab, I have put out a VM that you guys can use, and I've set up the basic AFL setup. It's possible there could be, I think you have everything you need there, but it's possible there could be one or two dependencies or something, not for AFL, but potentially for other things that you may do. It's hard to say because I'm not really working in that environment. I'm working in my own VM. But if it is, you should probably get some kind of error message, and should be probably pretty trivial to fix it. And I don't think that is an issue. I think it should be fine. Now in the IA lab, a couple things to be aware of. So I talked about time and CPU. If you want to really be successful with fuzzing and AFL and not just doing some crazy thing where you just sit there and run it for 10 minutes and be like, oh, I fuzzed something. Well, you didn't really fuzz anything because you didn't find any crashes. So you need time and CPU. In the IA lab, they give you leases for 10 hours. And after that, they suspend. So that's just something to keep in mind. I'm not sure how that would necessarily affect this. I think that if it stopped then and you started back up, I think it would continue without problems. If it didn't, that's okay. We can still live with that, because one of the aspects about AFL, if you're being successful with it, is it can be a cycle where you get new you get outputs that's generated, more test cases, and you can take those and you can refine those by doing things like tmin and cmin on those, and then you could use those as your new input. And there's also an option that you can continue AFL from when it was last used. So that could be another potential way of dealing with the 10-hour lease, but I'm hopeful that if you just, because it should just capture the RAM and save it at suspended state, and so once you open it back up, I'm hopeful that it'll just continue running without issue. But I guess that remains to be seen. I just created those for you guys yesterday. So let's take a look more at the PDF here. A couple of notes there to be aware of. No weird highlighting, underlining, strange fonts, or if you take a screenshot, don't just capture your entire desktop. Focus in on whatever is relevant. Now that said, don't just take a teeny tiny I guess it's not letting me highlight here, but area, show me enough that I can actually see and understand what's going on. I just don't need to see the entire desktop. So SpiderNum, we'll take a look at that in a moment. So SpiderNum is a server that we can do some fuzzing on. Now, as you install Peach, now as I mentioned, if you guys are using the IA Lab, how many of you plan to use IA Lab versus non-IA Lab? IA Lab, show of hands. No? Okay, so if you're not doing the iLab, then you want to be careful with some of these instructions. Now, John and Austin, if you guys are using the VM that I provided to you before, then it's going to be a little bit easier, but if you don't have it or don't want to use it, then so we can go to this location here, and so if you click on all these tutorials and stuff, you'll see get all these error messages, which I don't know why that is, but you can do the debug or the release. I did the release. Just download it and take it and install it. You also need to have WinDebug installed, and so WinDebug, there's going to be x86 and a 64-bit one. It's going to use the 64-bit one, so it requires that. Now, typically when you install WinDebug, I think it installs both of them, but you can also select to just install one of them if you want. .NET runtime, if you don't have that, you'll need to go and install that. And I think if you try to install Peach without .NET, I think it'll give you some kind of message to let you know and maybe help you with that. So if you need to download WinDebug, let's go down here, and we don't want the preview version. We can get debugging tools for Windows 10, or actually probably need to get an earlier version, because it really depends on the operating system. So if you're working on Windows 10, it's fine. If it's not, then you'll need to go get an earlier version. So some of the earlier releases, and I think they don't have Windows 7, but 8.1 should work. So you can go and do the SDK, and I think there should be an option where you can select the components, just select the debugging tools for Windows, and you can ignore everything else. But I'm trying to remember. I was trying to install the 7.0, and it didn't have one of them. I think it may have had only the 64-bit, but not the x86. In the past that wasn't a problem, but some of the links and whatnot just were not. It just wasn't working for me. But so I did use the Windows 8, and it ran fine. So if you're somebody who's trying to set up WinDebug on your own, then this is where you want to go and how you want to do it. I don't think that the preview version is going to work with Peach Fuzz. I haven't tried it, but I wouldn't chance it necessarily. So once you get your WinDebug set up, you get your .NET set up, then you want to go and try to run a file. And so I provide you with Notepad. It's a pretty trivial file. So, of course, some of the path inside of these may need to be changed to reflect your location of things like Notepad or WinDebug. Where are they? But you may get an error message. So it's very highly probable that you will get that error message. So to fix that, you want to download streams from sysinternals and then run the following command inside your Peach directory. So wherever your Peach directory is, then you can do that from command prompt, and I would do run it as administrator. And that should resolve this issue. And then you can test it by then running Peach, and if it runs, then you know you're in good shape. Again, keep in mind it uses the 64-bit Windows. If you try to use 32-bit, it's just not going to work for you. You can test it by opening it up and allowing it to mutate and fuzz, and take an opportunity to look at the results. Study how the notepad.xml is formed and how that relates to some of what we talked about last week. We then want to build our own Peach pit to model network activity. We can look to our class video for inspiration and guidance. So I guess today's video, when we talked about Peach on last Thursday or whenever it was. So I provide you with a very basic stub. It doesn't mean it's 100% correct, so you may need to make some modifications. We'll take a look at some other relevant examples. Okay, so there's a server, and there's also a client. Now, as you try to get a feel for, the server and the client, there are different things you could do. I mean, if you want to try and capture the traffic using Wireshark, you can do so. You can look at them inside of IDA Pro if you want to, or Ghidra, or WinDbg. But a lot of that stuff really isn't too necessary for this particular task. And then we just provided the localhost. I just am not doing very well today, am I? So this will look very familiar to your guys's what you guys did for Lab 0. It's similar to that, but this is also vulnerable. If you want to figure out what's going on, you can do help. It says a spider weaves her web so she can cross the river and sell her bounty of silk. The server accepts two commands, spider and num. So those will maybe be commands. It caught me off guard. I wasn't expecting it to do that. I'm actually going to modify the binary, so don't look at what you have out there right now because it wasn't supposed to do that. So I was making some changes to it, and because it's only supposed to crash if you do certain vulnerable type things, and part of the crash is artificially induced, and so let's take a look at num. It just tells you lucky number, and then somehow you can crash number. Does a buffer overflow do it? Probably not. So you want to use your fuzzing to get that to work. How do we do that in Peach? That's the question. So let's take a look at basic level. We have our notepad. So we have things like data model, state model, agent. We have WinDbg set up there, command line value, what it is that's being fuzzed. Monitor, what we're monitoring. We're monitoring notepad. We have our local agent. We have the publisher. It's publishing a file. What's the file called? It's fuzz.txt. And so we'll then use the file that's being published at that location. Our output, it goes to logs. The string value is hello world, so it takes that and does mutations based on that. So we see successfully fuzzing. I mean, again, this is just review, and we can do Control-C to stop it. So that's a good sign. And this is going off of default. So the test name there is default. So if you don't give it a specific test name, it'll just always go to the default. And that was the problem with our vulnerable server one that we were looking at last week. I was trying to do default and it was something else. Let's take a look at another one here. So the RM being real media files. So this one is another somewhat trivial example. So we have data model and file name. We're using these as input to kind of go off of, and so this right here indicates that we're going in there and getting all of them that end in that extension. So those are our test cases that we're working off of. Where did I get those test cases? Well, I went and found a site that had real media test cases and used those. Our agent, VLC, that's where we're fuzzing. We're trying to see if it's vulnerable to malformed RMs and Windebug x64, monitoring. My tab to completion really is not being very successful today. Performing iteration. This is kind of slow, so maybe the fact that they're slow, there could be something to maybe try to improve. But I mean, look at all those iterations we're doing. 1, 2. Peach is not necessarily a fast utility. The more fuzzing you can do, the better results you get. If something's going very slow like this, that's probably a problem because it's going to take a long time. AFL would be, blazing through this if you had it set up properly. So the other one we could do, and you'll probably need to do something similar for what you guys are doing, because you guys are going to be attacking a server, and so I think that this example may be a little bit more relevant, perhaps. So I go in there, I start the TCP server so that this can be used to monitor it. And I have this here. This is fuzzing a server, not the server that you guys are doing. This is a different server. But this is something similar that you guys could perhaps make use of. So the data model is Datatron. State. We provide the path to the server, path to Windebug. We have a host and a port, so those are specific things that are required for it to run. And I've renamed this to default. So this one is a lot faster than the other one, as we can see. And if we let this run long enough, it should generate a crash, and we could go in there and check it out. So there we go, there's a fault. Is it exploitable? That remains to be seen. It tries to reproduce it. It was successful. If they can't be reproduced, then that may not necessarily be a true vulnerability. There could be other strange things that are going on, but if it is reproducible and it is a crash, then there's a much higher probability that it could be relevant to us. So I think what I'm asking for you guys to do in terms of Peach Fuzz is not too necessarily difficult, really. So you'll just need to fuzz spider stub. Hopefully, I need for you guys to get some crashes. If you don't get crashes, you're going to lose out on some points. And then once you've done that, try to analyze what caused the crash. What's the underlying issue? Some of you may, if your reverse engineering background is limited, that may be more of a struggle, but I think a lot of you should be able to be successful with that. Keep in mind you do have exploitable. You can also open it up and rerun it with the input. So Peach should provide you with the input that has been mutated. So you could take that same input and run it again. Set breakpoints and WinDebug or whatever debugger of choice that you may wish to use, and you may open the code up inside IdaPro or Ghidra and see what's the underlying condition that caused it. We will talk a little bit more about IdaPro and Ghidra later on. I may provide some other supplementary videos for online students who've never used those before. I have also indicated that if you don't have a reverse engineering background, then there are resources that you can turn to. So that's that for Peach. Did we have any questions on Peach? Now AFL, this one may take a little bit more time. I don't think it's necessarily exceedingly difficult, really. But to actually get actual crashes, then you may need to spend a little bit of time with it and do some of the steps that we've talked about. If you don't put the time into it, then you probably won't get a crash, and that will be reflected in the grade. So this is a source code that has been deliberately infected with many vulnerabilities. So it's not just one vulnerability, but there's a lot of vulnerabilities. So there are many opportunities for unique crashes. Potentially, if you did really well, you could even get in excess of 100 crashes. And they wouldn't all be unique crashes, but as far as unique crashes, you should probably you could get at least 15 unique crashes. So I think getting a couple unique crashes is not necessarily asking for a lot. If you just do the bare minimum in terms of using it and setting it up, then you may not get a crash. But if you follow the steps that we talked about, then you definitely should probably get some crashes. Now this isn't working in a Linux environment, and we're primarily focused on working in a Windows environment, but for I wanted to introduce the two most prevalent and well-known fuzzing utilities, and AFL certainly seems to be almost overtaking Peach, and because it is evolutionary in nature, it can be very extremely useful. And again, we can also use it in a Windows environment, a black box approach. So, this is kind of a learning stage for us. We're working in Linux and working with the source code just makes it a little bit easier for us. Removes some roadblocks. So let's go over some of the steps, how we will need to do this. And again, all of this is reflected in our video from Tuesday. So initially we want to compile the JPEG parser to make sure that it has AFL instrumentation. If you don't do that, then it's not going to work. Actually, now that I think of it, I may not have put the right JPEG file on D2L, so don't have those files either. I'm going to take it after class ends. I'll take that offline, and I'll go back up later this afternoon. I think it's the same, but I may have put a different one on there, although, like I said, it really doesn't matter too much, really. And then create a corpus of test cases. Do some research on JPEG file format. Maybe find a website that provides a specification for that. Some good test cases that people who are actually creating JPEG parsers, they use these to test them. I mean, JPEG file format, if you're just trying to parse the traditional JPEG, I mean, that may be fine, but what about if you're doing more unusual things in terms of file format? What that means exactly, that's open-ended, but the test cases should reflect that. And I don't expect you, because part of the great thing with AFL is you don't have to necessarily go and investigate and research in detail what all those different things are. If you were fuzzing a JPEG parser on Peach, then you would actually want to go look at the file structure and study that in detail and make sure that you replicate each of those things inside your Peach fuzzer. So the level of difficulty can enhance quite a bit with Peach fuzzer. The deeper into it you get, and the more, the better your examples that you fuzz that you do. I mean, you could just take Peach fuzzer and use some input and mutate off of that, but if you actually make use of the file structure, then you're going to get better results. But doing that is a lot more complicated. Now, if you do with AFL and you get test cases, then you don't have to worry about all that, because that's the beauty of AFL. It'll take all that and work off of that for you. So getting a good corpus of test cases to start out with, and then simply just getting AFL to run. Are there problems that you need to troubleshoot? Are you having problems with command line syntax, so on and so forth? And get it to work on your corpus. What's the corpus? The corpus is your test cases. You take your test cases, you put them in your input, and then you'd create an output directory. So the output directory would be output that it generates. It could be hangs, it could be crashes, it could be, you go inside your queue. Inside your queue, you'll have other things that it generates by trying to traverse the different code paths. It discovers new code paths, and it discovers them with these inputs that have been mutated, so it'll save it in there. And so you can go inside the queue and you can get other inputs, and so you could take those inputs inside the output, wherever you set up your output, inside there'll be a queue. You could go in the queue, and then you could get those, and you could restart it and add those to your input directory. Now, again, as I mentioned before, there are issues with what if the file's too big. If a file's too big, then it's going to take longer to run. So we want to do our tmin on it. And the tmin is going to reduce the file size for an individual file. And tmin works on a specific file. So if you want to run, you say that you start out with maybe 10 or whatever. I probably would initially maybe run cmin on those 10 and see see if you can reduce it. Maybe run tmin on each of them. So you'd want to probably do a bash script to iterate through all of them. So that's part of the task here. You'll need to create a bash script. And then cmin will go and reduce the actual corpus itself, so things that are not necessary. Creating a dictionary. So there's a script inside one of your readings online, and we demoed that on Tuesday. You can take that and apply it, and now you have a dictionary. It's going to make it a lot easier, hopefully. So it'll go and pull strings and constants from JPEG. And JPEG was the name of the software, so that may be kind of confusing. So it's not pulling it from a JPEG, but the software called JPEG, which is a JPEG parser, a toy parser of sorts. And so this is an iterative process if you actually want to be successful with it. So, initially you need to allow it to run, maybe complete a cycle. A cycle is where it goes and it completes all the known paths. I mean, there could be other paths, it just doesn't know it yet. And so if you do that, then your corpus, your output and the queue is going to expand. And so you could take those and do the same things again with cmin and tmin. Now, if you have a large number of those, it may take a period of time, potentially. So again, there's an issue where this is not something you're going to necessarily be able to complete in a short period of time. They're not necessarily, the assignment's not going to be something where you sit there and spend hours and hours working on it continuously, but there may be blocks of time where you just need to let it run. And then you come back to it and revisit it. So it's kind of like, I don't know, being a parent and you're fathering a child, or I guess mothering in the case of some of our online students. So again, iterative process. The number of times in which you do this may vary. If you're actually trying to get crashes, then you probably will do it, 2-3 times. But eventually, at some point, you may get as far as you're going to get with the inputs that you're using. You're maybe not generating any new outputs. The outputs are all pretty much the same. So it doesn't give you any new test cases to work off of. So eventually you may find that you've reached a stopping point. So what do I want from you for all of this? I need to see screenshots of running tmin, running cmin, running your dictionary and using it. And it's fine if you want to use the dictionary script that's online. You can also create your own, or there could be alternative ways of generating a dictionary. So if you're somebody who wants to get really into this and explore other possibilities of dictionary, don't feel that you need to limit yourself to this. You can interpret that however you like. Just a command showing you can successfully even run AFL. Show me how many paths you were able to find. So I know how many paths there should be. So if you just have very minimal paths that are found, that just tells me that somebody is just running it for a short period of time just to turn in something they didn't spend much time on. So you should be able to find a good amount of paths, a fair amount of paths, and then show me that you found some crashes. I do actually want to see crashes. Now, if you don't find crashes, okay, it's not the end of the world, but you're still not going to get full points. I do make a note where I don't want people to submit things in a zip file just because it makes it harder to grade. But if you do end up finding a lot of crashes, then go ahead and send that to me in an archive. It could be any format for an archive, so it doesn't need to be a zip. But send those to me as well. But if it's just a small number of crashes, then you can just take a screenshot. That's fine. And then specifically here, these are the points, how it goes out. So you get 3 points. 3 out of 15 for getting a crash. Some optional things. Maybe you want to make up some points you didn't think you'd get otherwise, or you're just really into this. So if you set it up to run in parallel, and that we did kind of go over that briefly, and there's more information online, but that definitely can speed things up. And I do have it set up in the iLab, so you guys do have 4 cores that are available to you, and I'm pretty sure it should work without issue. To get that to work exactly, you'll need to do a little bit of research, because I just really only touched upon it. If you go hog wild and get a huge number of crashes, then I'll recognize that you put time and effort into this, and I definitely can give bonus points, and that amount will vary on how many you provide. And then I just ask that keep everything under 10 pages. So, any questions on the requirements of that? So, when do we think this should be due? Do you think you guys need a week or a week and a half or 2 weeks? Keep in mind you do have the grace period. John?
Yeah, I'd say probably like a week and a half.
Week and a half, so 10 days?
Yeah, 10 days.
Probably the Monday.
What?
The Monday of so just give us like a week, and then instead of being Thursday, the Monday afternoon.
Well, I don't necessarily do by the specific dates, but I could do 10 days. And then you'll have a grace period too, so. Just because some of this, if you get started 3-4 days, you're still going to need time to get it to work. Now that said, I don't know necessarily in this classroom which people have finished what, but if you're somebody who's continuously on like the lab 0 or lab 1 and you're weeks behind, that's eventually going to catch up with you, and you're probably going to really not do too well on the course. So I would encourage people not to use those due dates, because you may need that time. So right now some people are finishing up lab 0 and they're maybe just getting started on lab 1, and that may take them a week, and that week eats up part of the time that's available for this, which does legitimately may take more time. But people can do what they want. It's not my place to say. So I thought we'd spend the rest of our time working on some examples, and now I did go into what's going on with that to D2L and placed some over in content. Clicked on the wrong button, of course. So samples in class. So if you want to follow along in the iLab or at home later on, feel free to do so, although I don't really think it's necessary in any case. We can just kind of walk through some of the steps. It'll be similar to what we did before, but maybe give you a little bit better understanding or some additional insights. And I think repetition is always good. So we have 2 here. We could do audio files, or we could do TCP dump. Let's do the audio files. So this is similar format to what you guys are doing. So we go to the source code and check that out. There's a make file. So I'm seeing I'm looking for anything that's hard-coded that I may need to change in terms of the compiler. I don't see anything like that in here, so doesn't seem to be an issue here for me. And now I go in here, and this is all of our files. And additionally, we have a make file. I'm just go in here again, looking for the same thing to see if there's any hard-coded, like GCC, that I would need to change. Right there I see CC, so it'll take care of that for me because it's CC, not hard-coded. And these look good to me, so Looks like we're good to go there. So I need to set CC to AFL, GCC, and then make, and then this should go and compile it and add the instrumentation. So when we see all that green and blue, and it's actually saying instrumented too. So we know that it's been successful. We can look at the bottom and see is there any kind of error message, and there isn't. So we were able to compile that successfully. So that's great. Now we see that there's the audio file right there, and this is again similar to the other one. Structure. So this one should have inputs for us. So there are some potential inputs that we could make use of there. And let's go back over to So a couple things we could do right now is we could just simply run the software to try to get a feel for it, to see how it even works, maybe. And so we see the different options there. So it's essentially trying to convert something. And I don't believe it actually does the full conversion process, but it gives information on a what-if situation. So it prints out some information for us right there. So any thoughts on what the next step, what we would want to do if we were actually trying to be serious about this? We kind of looked at the test cases right here. Any thoughts beyond that? So we looked at the test cases. Would we want to add to the test cases possibly? Is that what you're trying to get at?
I mean, I haven't actually gone through the process before.
That is right. So, looking at the test cases, but we only have 2 test cases. If we look at the supportive file formats, there's Wave, but there's these other things too. We don't have any of those. So, if we were actually being serious about this, we would want to go and get some good examples of all of those. I know, Austin, you worked a lot with WaveFile. Do you know a good repository for sample WAV files, or you just studied the file format? That's so I see test files, Codeplex, so that's making me think. It didn't take me there, so. Another good thing to do would be, and we probably don't have time to do this because it's not something I'm going to do necessarily in 5 minutes or in a minute, is look at GitHub repositories. Are there utilities that are running WAV files? Are they running the AIF? or any of these other file formats. If it's an actual true utility, and I mean, there are a couple different types of people that can use GitHub. It could be somebody who's just doing kind of hobbyist type amateur code, but if it's a more serious effort, then they should have test cases where they run it against various types of things, and those test cases should be well cultivated. That's ideal situation, may not always be the case. So GitHub might be a possibility. We could just try to find test cases on random people's or companies' sites. So I'd want to do that for all of those. Again, for time issues, we're not going to do that just because it does involve some active research. But let's say that we'll start with those two. I mean, if you let AFL fuzz run long enough, then it may find everything. Maybe not. I don't know. So we could run tmin on them. Now, ideally, again, I would do more than just two, but then output, you could have a good naming convention. Could be, if you're doing a bash script, for instance, you could have something be, a placeholder for you iterate through a folder and get each file that's inside that. So that could be what you have right there for your seed.wave. I mean, your output, maybe you just append min to it or something. So you could use that same placeholder there. So I might do min.wave, and then I need to path that out. And let's see. So I ran it, and it didn't reduce it any, but that's kind of what you would expect, really, from this. Just because
if you'd already run it once before, would it reduce it, or? I mean, I guess I'm just trying to understand what the minifier is supposed to do at this point.
The tmin will remove anything that is kind of not really necessary from a fuzzing standpoint. If a good example is if you're doing like a YAML file, and a YAML file you have different words, and then you have a colon and some other colon. It'd actually go through and reduce the alphabetic characters to like zeros. If blocks of data are, I don't know all the criteria in terms of how it reduces it, but it does. Whatever it does exactly, it does makes it the bare minimum that need be, so that when you actually run it, then if it takes less CPU time to process it, because you're talking about doing it in high volumes. So if you're doing if it's a big huge file, it's going to take a lot longer. And so if we get it as minimal as possible, then we can increase our speed. So we were successful there. Another thing, of course, we could do is the cmin. So AFL cmin, and then this time we can do the directory. And I forgot to make an output directory, so So O for our output. And narrow it down to one file? Really? Okay, so I guess those two are not really necessary. We can just do with one input. But again, this is just, one file format, so that's really probably not going to be adequate. But for a start, we got to start somewhere, I guess. And then now actually running it. So do AFL fuzz, and then it's going to want a new output file or output folder. So we're just doing this quick and dirty here. So we'll just do output 2. And our inputs, we made some new inputs. We put them in output, so we'll use that as our input directory. So it may seem opposite logic, but that's where we did our cmin on that, and so it tells us we don't need that other file, so we're not going to bother with it. And then the output, we'll put that in output 2. We do a -f, so this is the file that it's going to be fuzzing and creating. I think I probably could have used it for the other ones. I don't think it was necessary, but I think for this one, we will go ahead and do that. And if it's not clear, I'm of course using tabbing to help me type these. Makes it a little bit easier. No usable test cases in output. There we go. The file size of it is 0, so I would maybe need to revisit some of what I did there because I don't think it turned out too well. I wonder why it is 0. That is very bizarre. I guess it's an issue to maybe try and troubleshoot a later stage. So since that's not valid input, then we'll just go ahead and use our initial input directory. No such. Let me try to, maybe it's probably just the way I'm pathing these out. So it gave me a warning about some test cases being huge. I don't know if you guys saw that on red, so that would be something that I would want to address. But at this stage, we're just making sure that things are working okay. And there are some problems here. And this is a good learning example. So this, I only spent like 5 or 10 minutes looking at this example here. So this one actually has done 0 cycles. It has discovered 0 paths. Well, I guess, it has 2 paths, but it hasn't there we go. So it finally has discovered something. So it took a little bit of time, but it has found some paths, so that's a good sign. We got some crashes already, 3 crashes. So good thing I didn't give this as your guys' assignment, because this one is obviously maybe easy, maybe not. When you get to the triage state, those could be legitimate crashes, or maybe there's problems with AFL fuzz, could be memory issues. The memory issue could cause it to crash. So it's hard to say. Our speed there is very, very slow. We want that to be a lot higher. I mean, ideally it should be in the high several hundreds to somewhere in the thousands. And it's possible, I think that the reason for this, again, is the huge WAV file, 200 kilobytes. So if we could reduce that somehow successfully. So cycles completes. Once it completes a full cycle, that means it's, again, traversed every path that it knows about. Go ahead and stop there. Another thing that we could do is we could work on our dictionary. So this is, if you go in your reading, there's some information there. And, we can take that, and of course I've already done it, but is this it? Looks like this is it, actually. So that's inside JPEG sources. But if I hadn't done that, then I could just open it up, and we'll just go ahead and do that just to make sure everybody's on the same page. I have too many of these open, apparently. And I want it to be, a green color when it's done, so that lets me know it's executable rather than a white color. And so then I can go and path out to the directory for audio files and go into where the actual binary is. And actually before we do that, we need to see what's inside test cases. Where is it going to put our test cases? It's going to put them inside test case. Wherever this directory is, it's going to be test cases, and then store it there. So I'll go ahead and make a test cases directory right here. And it will go run and do its thing. It'll take, I don't know, a period of time. It could be several minutes, could be longer. It's just going through and making use of some Linux disassembly tools to go in there and extract different strings. So it's pretty clever how it's actually doing that. And then once we do that, then we can make use of the -x switch and then path that out to the test cases directory. And so we would use that for our dictionary. But like I said, it's going to take a period of time for that to go. Now, it is kind of strange what happened with our... Well, I guess while we're working on that, we can look at some... So this is our example from before, where we have different strings that it generated. So we go in there and that's just a T, but that was a string. So not every string inside a binary is going to necessarily be relevant and useful to us. So output 2, we can see that's what the actual fuzzing utility was creating for us. We could see hangs, we could see crashes, which, you know, we're after those, of course. And then Q, so other things that it generates that's able for it to be successful. And it denied it because... I'm not sure why it denied it. Oh. Trying to figure out why it didn't let me go in there. But can I view what's inside it? No, I can't even let me do that. So there'll be something to maybe troubleshoot and figure out what's going on with that. And do we have any questions? Looks like we're kind of starting to run a little bit short on time. So I don't think your guys' assignment's necessarily too difficult, too challenging, but it may take a little bit of effort. We'll probably move on to another new topic next week. Now, again, I guess going back to, we do actually get inside our, let's actually take a look at this. So we go into our crashes. Why does it keep denying it? Is it... Well, let's look in a different crashes for something else.
This crash is made by a pseudo user.
What?
This crash is made by a pseudo user, meaning like a regular user won't be able to go into it, but it's created by a group somewhere. So I can't see.
I mean, that could be a possibility. I'm not sure.
So if you like pseudo CD crashes,
I tried doing that and it said CD command not found.
Yeah. Executes probably more.
CD is built in the bash. So
I can't hear you.
CD is built in the bash, so whenever executes CD is where you can either just do an ls and then space and then tack LA, see what the perms are, or you can escalate to it.
Like that?
Ls will.
Yeah.
Just a straight L and then you rip that way. Yep, they're on memory.
So there we go. Looks like that's the issue there. So you want to be smart about how you do that, how you set that up. And questions, anyone? Well, I was going somewhere with crashes, so we'll just pretend that we were able to view inside the crashes directory. So we look at the crashes, and if we wanted to, let's bring up our slide. That might make it a little bit easier. So when we actually get inside the crash folder, it'll look exactly like this. And so this gives us, information on things like the seg fault. We could path that out to the parent source. So if we go into the queue and find the file with this specific ID number, then we can check and see the difference from that and the original test case that it was fuzzed off of. The fuzzing strategy, so is it doing things like flipping bits or flipping bytes or other types of things, and then specifically which byte is being fuzzed, in this case byte 60. So it gives us insights into maybe what we're doing that's different that caused this particular crash. But then the next stage would be then to triage it with GDB or use it exploitable with GDB, or some of the other scripts that I mentioned previously, which is not required for this. If you guys want to do that, great. If you're familiar with GDB and feel you have an understanding of it, but I'm not asking that of you. So, all right, well, catch you guys next week, and thanks for coming to class.